Today we're going to talk about energy systems. This topic will come up in level 2 and level 3. I'm just going to put it all in one video because even though level 3 has more of examples in terms of like what exercises are linked to which energy system, it's still beneficial to know for level 2. Once you learn it once, you won't need it to learn it again for level 3. So you might as well sit down and watch the whole video. I've tried to make it as simple as possible and break it down into the ways that I needed to break it down in order to memorize this topic. I'm also going to try and fit in some exam questions at the end. Some of these exam questions are the ones that I've made up. Some of them are from actual past exam papers. Now this topic will come out regardless of which provider you use. If you don't know who I am, I'm Isabella Murray. I'm known as the No Bullshit Fitness Trainer. I'm on Instagram and other social media. I'm also a fitness expert, so newspapers come to me when they want a quote. I do have level 2 and level 3 in personal training. I also have a level 2 award in community sports and a qualification for mental health awareness when it comes to sports and physical activity. I want to help you pass your exam and I want to make this as simple as possible. So let's get straight to it. If you do want to learn more things, you want to learn how to put this into like daily practice, definitely follow me on Instagram. You'll find it super helpful. So let's get started. Let's start off with just a bit of misconceptions you might hear in the industry, like what fitness influencers might post. You might hear them say that being in the fat burning zone means you're burning body fat, which is not true. And all of that will make sense after this lesson. So that will help you kind of have a rough idea of the importance of understanding this. So for any muscle contraction to happen, and it can be just me speaking to this camera, or it could be me doing a bicep curl, anything, me speaking is a muscle contraction. We've got muscles in our face. Me doing any form of movement, you watching and listening to me involves muscle contraction. This all involves ATP. ATP is what we need for muscle contraction. ATP is found in the mitochondria. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Tri is highlighted in red because tri means 3. Now, without ATP, there's no muscle contractions whatsoever. Now, because adenosine triphosphate is 3, ATP, when you write it down in terms of its molecule structure, is 1 adenosine and 3 phosphates. So when you do write out the molecules, it's 1 adenosine molecule and 3 phosphates. Now with ATP, during exercise, the third phosphate is broken off and that is now available to use for muscle contraction. So instead of APPP, it becomes APP. So remember, triphosphate is 3 Ps. It ends up becoming 2 during a muscle contraction. If there's no ATP, there's no muscle contraction. ATP leads to adenosine diphosphate. Now ATP lasts for 6 seconds. Now after the 6 seconds for it to continue, it needs to be resynthesized. Now this can happen in 3 ways. Now I'm teaching it to you in a linear way. This is based on how it actually happens in the human body. So after 6 seconds of ATP, it goes to ATP-PC, which is creatine phosphate. Then it goes to lactate, then it goes to aerobic. Now the ATP-PC, also known as creatine phosphate, and lactate are both anaerobic, which means without oxygen. Aerobic is with oxygen. So think about it when it comes to energy systems. When you get an exam question, immediately write out 2 arrows, one for aerobic and one for anaerobic. This is what I tell people to do when energy systems comes up. Just write anaerobic, creatine or ATP-PC, and lactate. Now, it's good to know that ATP-PC means creatine. Depending on your exam provider, they might use the word creatine for ATP-PC, or they might just say ATP-PC. So it's good to know that ATP-PC is creatine phosphate. So do not get confused, do not be thrown off if they use one or the other. So just write out the 2 like this, do the 2 arrows, you break it down like this, and you're good to go. Now, when you've done it like this, you immediately know it goes from ATP-PC to lactate, then it goes to aerobic. You see it in that linear way. Now in the exam, you'll need to know the fuel source, duration, recovery, and other factors. So let's break it down. With ATP-PC, also known as creatine phosphate, the fuel source is creatine. That's why people take creatine tablets. Creatine actually comes from meat. If you're a vegetarian, you most likely do have lower creatine levels. Now, with lactate, it is glycogen. Glycogen is from carbs. Glycogen is the stored form of glucose. And then for aerobic is glycogen and fat. Now, as mentioned before, when I wrote out on the whiteboard, we've got creatine phosphate goes to lactate, then goes to aerobic. Now, this is because of the duration it lasts, because first we start with ATP, which is 6 seconds. After that, it goes to ATP PC, which is 6 to 10 seconds, then lactate for 10 seconds to 3 minutes, then after that, aerobic, so it is linear. So we spoke about carbs and we spoke about fat, but what about protein? We use protein when carbs are low. This probably won't come up on the exam. It didn't come up in level 3, it won't come up in level 2, but it's just good to know. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier about mistakes in the industry, what fitness influencers spread bullshit. They say because anaerobic uses fat as fuel, it therefore burns body fat, which isn't the case. So now what else we need to know is how it's used when it comes to fitness. So after the 6 seconds of ATP, when it comes to explosive movements, we then use creatine phosphate. So think of a high jump, think about a shot put, a javelin throw, anything that lasts up to 10 seconds. It could also be powerlifting, not weightlifting, powerlifting when they just do 1 rep max. In the exam, they'll give you questions like, oh, what energy system does a 400-meter race use? You just be like, okay, lactate. So they'll give you specific sports and you need to associate it with an energy system. So I've put some examples here because these examples probably will come up in the exam. So I think it's good for you to put it into practice. So a 400-meter running race is about a minute run. So when we look back at the grid, what allows us to have ATP for 1 minute? If we go back to the grid, we can see it's lactate. Oh, marathon runners. I have no idea how people do that. I wish I could, but I just don't have the energy for it. Marathon, they're running for time. So what does that fall under? Anything longer than 3 minutes. No one can run a marathon in less than 3 minutes. It's basically impossible. Because marathon runners are doing like at least minimum 10K. Let's do boxing. If we're thinking of an actual boxing match, it would be lactate. If we're just doing one punch, like just one jab, that would be creatine phosphate. 1 mile swim would be aerobic. And the guy lifting there, in my books, he's a power lifter. But power lifter would be creatine phosphate. To help put it more into context, anything that comes underneath ATP, PC, creatine phosphate would be explosive movements. Like I said, javelin, powerlifting, anything fast and quick. Lactate would be like resistance training, like at the gym, when you're doing 3 sets of 8s. And aerobic when you'd be anything long distance and endurance. Now, they also differ in terms of RPE. If you don't know what the RPE scale is, it's rate of exertion. That's what RPE stands for, perceived rate of exertion. And it goes from 1 to 9 or 1 to 10. Now, we can break this down. If you have something that's high intensity for a short burst of activity, that would probably be RPE 9 to 10. Now, when you're doing weightlifting at the gym and you're doing your set, you're not huffing and puffing as if it's 1 rep max. You are sweating a little bit, so it'll be around 7 to 8. And that's what we see here. And then aerobic tends to be less intense. Now, you also need to know the positive and negatives of each one. Now, I know this seems like a lot of information, but it's actually just rewording what we already know, really. I'm not going to lie to you. So, for example, with the ATP PC, we know ATP PC is already readily available because it's the first line of the energy systems, because it's ATP PC, lactate, then aerobic. So we know it's readily available. And negatives, we only know lasts for 10 seconds. So this is information we already know. We're just now ranking it as positive or negative. So don't worry about this being extra information because it's really not. It's just reframing what we've already spoken about. So I won't go into it a bit too much. A helpful way to remember it is that ATP is high intensity up to 10 seconds and aerobic is low intensity. So anything in between will most likely be lactate. Now, even though we're learning these as separate energy systems, we've got the creatine phosphate, lactate, and aerobic, we do use all of the energy systems all the time. However, when it comes to like exercise and certain movements we do it, we use one energy system predominantly more than the other. So we use all, however, we might use a little bit more of something. I thought it'd be helpful and draw up some exam questions for you. So press pause and answer them. And there are a few more on the next slide. So pause, answer them, and then come back and we can go through it. So this first question, I've only seen it come up twice and they haven't reworded it as anything else. It was this exact wording. So the first one is basically saying, where is ATP? And it's in the mitochondria. So if you got that right, well done. So next one, which energy system will mainly be used during a triathlon? There are some people out there willing to do 3 forms of cardio in one long race. So think of it, a triathlon is a marathon, but in 3 different forms. So it's a long form cardio. So what energy system would that be? So if we look in terms of linear, in terms of energy production of ATP and duration, what is the last one in that list? So we got ATP, so we go from ATP, then ATP to creatine to lactate, then lactate to what? Aerobic. So the answer is aerobic. Which energy system would we use for a 1 mile swim? Now, I can't swim at all. I just drown. I don't know why, but I just drown. I can't even float. But anyways, that's besides the point. For 1 mile swim, it will be aerobic. So question 4, similar to the other question. So which energy system do we mainly use for a marathon? A marathon is long form cardio. So that would be aerobic. Now, the next one, which energy system lasts for max 10 seconds in duration? Now we know it goes from ATP to creatine to lactate to aerobic. Now we just said with question 4 that marathon is long form, so it's aerobic. So 10 seconds should either be creatine phosphate or lactate. Which one is it? It's creatine phosphate. So lactate is anything from 10 seconds to 3 minutes. And then the last question here, which energy system would powerlifters mainly use? Now we used this as an example earlier. So powerlifters just do 1 rep max. They try to lift as heavy as they can just once. So that would be an explosive movement. Explosive movement uses creatine phosphate.